Distinguished guests, this session, What's the Fix? WTF? Economic Development is sponsored by PNC Bank. Please welcome President and Chief Executive Officer of Business Leaders for Michigan, Jeff Donofrio. Corporate Board Executive, CEO Advisor, and Community Strategist, Sandy Pierce. State Representative, Bill G. Schuette. Chief Executive Officer of The Right Place, Randy Thelen. And to moderate the discussion, please welcome journalist and author, Devin Scillian.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks. Thank you all so much for being here. I'll tell you at the outset that it's kind of cheeky what we've done, but originally when Bob Riney and I started talking about these sessions, we were planning on using WTF in its current understood iteration. Because it's a fair question when you start wondering what happened. What happened with education in Michigan? What happened with our economic climate? But we didn't love the doomsdayness of it, so we started trying to look forward, and that's how we end up with What's the Fix. We got the video ready to run for to kind of set up all of these conversations? That's where we are. The house is on fire, and yet that's where I want to start because, Jeff, we have this really interesting disconnect that was really laid bare in the polling done by the Glenn Gariff Group for the Chamber just in advance of this conference. Yeah. We know what the numbers are. We can see where Michigan lags so badly, where we didn't just 20, 25 years ago, and yet, if you ask the average Michigander, they think the state's doing fairly well.
That's right.
Somewhere this disconnect is not only out of phase, but dangerous too, right?
It is. I mean, you know, it's been a decades-long slide, right? So, you know, when it's kind of that frog in a boiling pot of water, you don't see it immediately. You don't feel it and jump out and have that urgency or that crisis. So, you know, I was just on an education panel on the other side of the Grand Hotel, and we talked about the fact that when I graduated high school more than 20 years ago, we were 16th in the state in fourth grade reading. Today, we're 44th. Yeah. You know, when I was growing up in the 1980s, we were top 10 state for income. Today, you know, we are 50th in income growth and 40th in per capita income. That is hard to be felt in any one given year, but as you look at the numbers and you see the slide, it's undeniable. So the house is on fire. And the question is, how do we make sure we're not back here again a year from now saying the same things, trying to say, you know, that something needs to be done without a fix? And it is something that, you know, you point out rightly, in education is a good example where if people don't feel it, if people don't see it, if they think it's a Detroit problem or a Pontiac problem or a Flint problem, and not a problem for their own school, and what we know is that 80-some% of schools, 80 or 90%, underperform their peers, so it's an all of us problem. There's not that urgency to fix it. There's not a demand. You know, in 2018, we had an election that was characterized by a fix the damn roads perspective. And you saw over the last 8 years, we focused on fixing the damn roads. How do we make sure that the issues of income, the issues of education, the issues of job creation and costs are the focus for this year?
I want to let everybody weigh in on this disconnect before we get going. Sandy, I think, I don't want to punish optimism, you know, but when people are feeling that something is better than it is, it's really hard to get movement then from them, right?
I don't think we've done a good enough job in this state really explaining what the issues are and how bad it is. When I talk to my neighbors about the education issue in this state, we're 44th in the country, nothing to be proud of. They say, yeah, the schools are terrible except mine. And then I send them to the BLM site where they can compare their school's performance to the other peers throughout the country. So we have to have a reality check, and I'm so glad we've had the conversation here, but that's a couple thousand people that understand. We need to convince 9,700,000 that this issue's real and show them the stunning statistics. We have a structural problem. Every time we change administrations, in fact, every 2 years, if we change the legislature, then the agenda changes.
Yep.
We don't have consistency, we don't have alignment, and you can't have a long-term success over 25 years if you don't have a long-term strategic plan that you can stick to.
In fact, I want us all to spend some time on the perils of purple here in just a minute. But before we do it, let me let you two weigh in on this too. Bill, because I'm also very curious about what you see in Lansing. Is there a disconnect among your fellow lawmakers? Is there a sense that things are better than they actually are? Because it's really hard to get elected on pessimism usually.
It is, and in my role, in my position, I try to listen as much as possible. When I think about this, I think we need to be both listening and talking about these issues better, because in my district, I'm knocking on doors, I have my office hours. Nobody says, oh gee, we're 49th in population growth. They say, I'm worried I'm not going to see my grandkids, that they're going to move somewhere else.
Yeah.
Nobody says we're ranking so low in per capita income. They're saying, I feel like my dollar doesn't go as far at the grocery store as it used to. So I think making these statistics, which are really alarming, which show that our state's not on a positive trajectory, taking that into the ways that it relates to the everyday voter, the everyday human being, the real, very real consequences of bad policy decisions that they're living with. That's how I think we can kind of turn that real statistics into hopefully positive change.
Yeah, it's an important role of storytelling really here to help move those statistics into people's lives. Randy, you come from the west side of the state. I'm curious if you see anything different or if it's the same problem.
No, I mean, I think it's universal. I think this affordability conversation we're having as a country, and we'll have more and more as a state, I think some of that stems from wage stagnation combined with inflation, and it's putting some pressure on people in ways that we haven't really faced before. So I think it has the potential to bubble through as the hot topic going forward. But I think growth fundamentally solves for a lot of these challenges. You think about how we ended up in a fix the damn roads scenario. We had about a decade with a lack of growth, and the tax base sort of eroded or got away from us. The costs continued to pile up, but we couldn't do the maintenance. We couldn't keep up, and suddenly it got to this crisis point where we were able to make some maneuvers and get them repaired. But it was the lack of growth that got us into that position. And I think for Michigan going forward, in terms of what's the fix, Devin, I think really being committed to a true growth strategy. And in Grand Rapids, we haven't always had that. If you go back 30, 40 years ago, we were known as Bland Rapids, and downtown wasn't much going on. Economically, we were sort of middling through, and only after there was a real committed strategy and sustained effort to get after it and alignment among leadership. Now that we've enjoyed a couple decades of growth, can we build an amphitheater downtown that we opened up 2 weeks ago, and we're seeing a diversified economy that's paying dividends, and we can invest in some of the things that we're talking about here. Growth solves so many things. Decline creates so many problems, and we've got to find a way to get back on that growth
Which takes us back to the boiling frog, because we too often have to get to the crisis before we actually take action. But I want to get back to what Sandy was talking about, and I think is a growing concern and understanding that this conference is, I think, putting an increasingly hot spotlight on, and that is, Bob Rodney and I talk about this all the time, we've always admired our purpleness. It always seemed to speak to a kind of diversity in the state that I think we all enjoyed. We certainly enjoy all the attention we get at election time, but being a purple state means that we zig and zag a lot every 2 to 4 years. A really good example, Jeff, I think, and this doesn't, however you felt about the film incentives, whether they were good or bad, I'll just use that as an example. The film incentives were put in place, and we all of a sudden had people buying catering trucks and opening carpentry shops and opening studio space and casting agencies, on and on and on, and then change of administration, change of plans, and they were all left kind of high and dry. But that's just one of many examples that I think we could point to where all of a sudden, Jeff, we don't keep a consistent message or a consistent plan.
I think that's right. And, well, first, Devin, I could do with a few less commercials from political candidates in any given year. Maybe a few more Gardner White commercials would be great, too. It's fine. But, we call it the Purple State curse at BLM at times, right? It should be an asset. It should be something where we find common ground. Where
I want to celebrate it. I really do.
Yeah, but that has just not been the story for Michigan. And so, we have two parts of our Michigan in a New Era plan that we put out in November. One is about what do we need to change, the highest source of leverage, transform education, make Michigan the easiest state to build and grow, help activate our economy and reset economic development. But none of that is going to be possible unless we change the approach, unless we look at how we can have things that are going to survive a term of office, survive an economic crisis. In Michigan, we create these structures sometimes that can be undone in any given year, whether it's subject to a budget appropriation or whether it's something that's not a belt and suspender on funding being linked to outcomes. Mm-hmm. There are ways we can approach this differently because we know we're a purple state that goes back and forth. Part of that also is a cultural mindset where politicians, elected officials, leaders from the business community, from philanthropy, have to be looking for what is the common ground that's going to get us to a place for solutions that can last. Because if it's a Democratic approach, or it's a Republican approach, or it's a West Side approach, or a Southeast Michigan approach, the likelihood is it's going to be challenged in the future in some way.
Yeah. And
can it withstand that challenge? We've seen that in Michigan, the case often is no.
Sandy, you and I talked a couple weeks ago. You were pointing to what's going on in Ohio and their jobs initiative, which they have kind of found a way to strip out of the political jet stream so that it sort of stays on its own course, right?
So I'm going to give a couple of examples.
Sure.
And what's striking to me is there's many, and you know the states better than I do, Jeff. There are many states that have less advantages than Michigan does. And yet they've been able to overcome this divisiveness and been able to really produce a long-term strategy that's consistent and that people can depend on. So I'm going to tell you about Mississippi and Ohio. So in Ohio, they're really interesting stories because neither state is an obvious perfect blend. Over the last 15 years, and yet they've improved their economic competitiveness, becoming more coordinated and execution-oriented. So let me tell you Ohio. They have a Rust Belt history, legacy manufacturing dependence, population challenges, older industrial cities, and political divisions.
Sounds familiar.
So what did they do? They created Jobs Ohio. It's a quasi-private economic development corporation. So what Governor Kasich did at the time is he said, something's not working around economic development. They had kind of our version of the MEDC, and he said, we got to change this. We got to make it private. We got to take it out of the government's hands, put it in private industry, and give it a revenue source. So they gave it the liquor tax. Well, back then, 20-some years ago, it wasn't that large of a revenue source. Of course, we all drink, so now it is a big, big revenue source for them.
COVID helped with that.
But it has, honest to God, here's why it worked. Faster decision-making, business-oriented execution, regional coordination across the state, long-term strategy, aggressive site readiness, consistent focus across administrations, meaning since Kasich, there's been Republican and Democrat administrations. And it not only has survived, it has thrived. They attracted Intel, thousands of jobs over the next 10 years, 500,000 people planning to move to Ohio because of Intel. Now, it's not because of the weather. It is because someone in administration decided they could find common ground by doing something different. Number two, they focused on future industries. Listen to this: semiconductors in Columbus, aerospace in Dayton, logistics in Cincinnati, advanced manufacturing in Toledo, and technology in Cleveland. So it wasn't we're going to do it in Grand Rapids, but not Detroit. They decided together what the expertise was going to be for every single one of those major cities in the state of Ohio. This is not complicated. Now let's go to Mississippi. research-based Fortune
Good,
500
because it's tough to
concentration.
stomach taking advice from Ohio, but I'm kidding.
Okay.
No.
Engineering density, university scale. They have long-term alignment. Look up Momentum, Mississippi. They have alignment between business, education, workforce agencies, and state government. Workforce development became their central, that was their North Star. And site readiness. Every company that wants to invest, they want certainty. They don't want the rug pulled out from underneath them.
Yeah.
Mississippi did that, and he can tell you all about the Mississippi Promise around education.
On education,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And I'll just say one other thing about Jobs Ohio. Not only have they had consistency in the past, they've just renewed their liquor business license for another 25 years. So they're going to have consistency for another 25 years in the future.
Yeah.
Are we going to have it for 5 years? That would be a question.
Bill, I'm curious whether or not, how much does Lansing want to relinquish its role to create these sort of longer lasting initiatives?
So in my
Or does that
position-
feel
yeah,
like relinquishment?
No, I think in my position you have to be optimistic, or else life can get pretty depressing. And I'm one of the younger members of the state legislature, but I'm still old enough to remember when the presidential election came down to Ohio, right? And that's a swing state. And Florida is a state that was hotly contested every election year. And they're states that are growing. And there are states that are, having populations and per capita incomes that are increasing, in schools that are performing at higher levels than ours. And, the way I think about it is, we have to form a consensus. We have to, decide that obviously there's going to be people on either ends that may see things differently. But in the core, we need to have a set of common policies that we can agree on and assume that good intent. And I think too much we think of policy making if it's I love ice cream. If we think of it like an ice cream sundae, we're spending all our time thinking about that cherry on top, right? And there's going to want to be a Republican cherry or a Democrat, topping. But we need to focus on building that base, because that's what makes an ice cream sundae. It's not the cherry on top. And that's where I think we need to really dig in and deliver.
Randy, it's been interesting watching some political changes in your neck of the woods. Do you think that that's changing the ability to keep a straight through line on policy and on initiatives?
Yeah, and in the West Michigan dynamic, I think by and large, we still remain committed to that core vision that we want to be a growing market. We want to be a market that retains and attracts young people, and really are going about building a city and a region for those young people. And we were talking earlier, where do young people want to hang out? With other young people. And so you see it in pockets all around our state. What has happened and transpired in downtown Detroit is extraordinary. I mean, I don't think anybody here 25 years ago would have imagined what's happening there today. But we're seeing sort of green shoots throughout the state. Traverse City has a young growing population. Marquette has got some things going. And certainly in Grand Rapids, we've enjoyed this nice little renaissance. For us, I think it starts with strategy, it starts with aligned vision, and that kind of overcomes any political shifts that might occur. We stay true to that North Star. We've got a nice flywheel going where we've got our colleges and universities that have been able to grow enrollments in a tough environment, and employers who are there ready to receive them with jobs that are interesting for young people. And I think as we think about how do we grow Michigan, how do we retain those young people, we've seen the stats of some of our universities that are not able to retain, we're not able to retain those students here. We have to make sure we're developing and launching and helping really scale those companies that have those interesting places to work.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we've taken our eye off of that ball as a state.
Right. Jeff, Business Leaders for Michigan have put out their 3 pillars that you think that where things really need to change. I want to talk for a second about the first one, which is education.
Sure.
Michigan's always had a really interesting sort of relationship with the idea of an education. We were a state where you could come out of high school, go right into a plant, have a pretty good job, and before you knew it, you had a cottage and a boat up north.
Right.
We've then started to lament that we didn't have higher ed. Now AI is telling us, the skilled trades is actually a pretty good way to not be replaced by technology. How do we move forward with an education approach that makes sense now? I've said oftentimes, right, we have a 19th century system, right? It was designed in the 19th century, worked really well in the 20th century for Michigan, where you could walk off a graduation stage with a D- average and a high school diploma and get a good paying job. It is not going to work for the future because the division between those who have the tools to succeed and those who are going to struggle is only getting wider.
AI and the disruptions we see in the economy are going to continue to exacerbate that. So education gives people tools if we have a well-functioning education system. A high school diploma today in Michigan, it only has 2 requirements statewide. First is that you've been in your seat for long enough, right? You've sat in the classroom for a certain amount of hours. Attendance. Second is you've been exposed to certain classes, right? Chemistry, math, those types of things. Doesn't mean you've gained any skill or competency within those subject areas. So if we want a 21st century education, if we want something that's actually going to give the tools, the high school diploma has to change that standard. The Michigan Education Guarantee, which we talk about at Launch Michigan, which we've actually the Population Commission that Ambassador Ricolta chaired, pioneered this of how do we set a higher standard, because most states who've changed around their systems have started there. What's the goal? And then how do you build towards it? And that goal has got to give multiple different pathways. It's not just a pathway like we would see traditionally. It could be college, it could be into the skilled trades, it could be into starting your own tech company, but having the tools to be able to succeed in life. That has got to happen within our education system. And right now our education system, unfortunately, with 800 different school districts in the state, with a superintendent and a school board which are disconnected from the legislature and the governor on accountability, on performance, where if everyone's accountable, nobody's accountable, ultimately at the end of the day. We have a system that's not really focused on the outcomes. It's focused on a whole bunch of component parts.
Yeah.
So changing that means a governor and a legislature is going to focus on it, not for 6 months and try to get the next individual win that gets you a good press release, but something that is actually going to 8 years and 10 years from now going to take us from 44th to top 10, just like Mississippi was able to do. The change in Mississippi was when they said, we are tired of being 49th. We are tired of being the laughingstock of the country on education. And once that mindset change happened, their leaders got around the things that needed to happen, the formula that could be put in place.
And how long did it take, and where are they at now?
Well, they're 9th now, the 44th to 9th, right, in 11 years. In Maryland, so that's a red state. Maryland, which is a blue state, which the state superintendent, Dr. Carrie Wright, who led the Mississippi Miracle, went to now. She's the superintendent there. They've gone from 40th to 20th in just 4 years. So this works, and it doesn't have to be a decade-long process to see results.
20
and
spots.
by the way, absenteeism in the state of Michigan in the school system is the highest it's ever been.
Yeah. Randy, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, and Jeff, I think employers have a key part in this education reform.
Absolutely.
You think about University of Michigan's econ department just put out a forecast for Michigan. By 2050, they're forecasting a 2% reduction in population. So that is a house on fire stat. It doesn't mean we can overcome that with some effort if we retain more young people, welcome immigrations, and have more babies than deaths, of course. But on the employer side with education, in terms of retaining students, we've seen some things in action that work. We're going through a demographic drought. The enrollments that are now hitting college campuses have closed elementary schools, closed middle schools, closed high schools, and now are stressing universities. The next step is going to stress employers. That workforce is just going to be smaller. So we can't afford to have any students slip through the cracks anymore. And so we're leaning in and getting more and more employers engaged earlier with talent pipeline development. Students need to know with some degree of certainty when they graduate high school, are they going to college? Are they going to the military service? Are they going to a career pathway? And the data is overwhelmingly positive. The more they have an understanding of what's next for them, their completion rate in college, their completion rate to get a certification or learn a trade goes up exponentially. We reworked the strategy for our intermediate school district's career technical education program about 4 years ago. And sort of like your Mississippi model, 11 years ago from 44th to 9th, we've almost doubled in 4 short years the number of students participating in career tech ed because it was put a strategy, alignment around leadership and getting after an execution, changing the model to get out. Kids aren't on a bus now going to the ISD. The ISD trainers are going out to the various schools, and it's making a world of difference getting students prepared for what's next. And I think that's got to be part of our population discussion. It's got to be part of our growth conversation. And I think it's got to be part of our education discussion.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and I think accountability is such an important part of this entire equation because we would never tolerate losing to Ohio in football, right? Why are we tolerating losing to Mississippi in education? And that accountability has to be central, and that's accountability on the politicians, and that's accountability is on the education system. And Jeff, this is something we've talked about, but I question Michigan's ability with our structure right now to implement the Mississippi miracle here, because we could hire a governor and a legislature that says we want to make this our #1 priority, but our state superintendent and board of education is so diverse or so separate from that elected leadership. I think we need to demand accountability from our political leaders, but then also make sure that the buck stops. The governor should be able to hire and fire your state superintendent and say, the chief reading officer, that starts and ends there. And I think that's, how we can get some real positive change injected into our public education system.
Jeff, you want to jump in there on the political structure of it?
What we've said in our plan for Michigan is the governor has to have de jure de facto leadership of the education system. We want one person where the buck stops. I think the challenge, though, is other states have made that change, but they haven't seen progress. So it can't just be one flip of a switch, right? It's going to have to be a whole bunch of things that we do together to get this done. But I will say, so whether it's education or whether it's trying to attract jobs or investment or anything else, our systems are designed for a different time. And we've got to update those systems. We've got to make it so that we're making it easy for investment to come here, easy for jobs to come here. There's a statistic that I was just reading from our teams that we went in and we looked at some of these departments in the state of Michigan. This is something I know Representative Schuette has been focused on too. We miss, in some cases, 50% of the deadlines we set for ourselves on permit applications. So when you're trying to attract, when Randy is trying to bring in the next company, when we're trying to build a new place of work and business and create jobs, if we're missing 50% of our application deadlines that we self-impose, think about the message we're sending to that person who's trying to create a new job. My family was in the restaurant business. They were trying to serve customers for 80 years in Lincoln Park, Michigan. They didn't want to have to be a lobbyist and a lawyer to serve a customer. They just wanted to open their doors.
Well, I want us to get to talking about the 77 steps that it takes to open a restaurant, as the Metro Times recently chronicled. But Sandy, you're fond of talking about upskilling. I want to make sure that we're still beyond plans ahead. The people that we have right now that maybe aren't prepared for this new tech AI-driven world that we're talking about. What do we do to fix our situation now rather than, this is something that I can't fix by fixing curriculum in high school for next year.
So one of the things that Jeff talked about in the K through 12 system is absolutely right. We have to change the entire structure of it and the accountability. Colleges and universities in this state need to modernize their entire curriculum, because if you ever saw this podcast called Shift, S-H-I-F-T, happens, it will tell you that people entering college today, whatever they're taking up in terms of their area of concentration, by the time they graduate, it will not be useful. It will be useless. And so what we have to do, and one of the things I would love to see is for whether it's a community college or a university or a state college, is to give an opportunity for a student to graduate with a dual degree, that their main focus and a skill, a competency that allows them to do both. And so that's hard because it's hard to change the system, but what we can do right now is get all of these great companies, we have so many great companies in this state, to start saying, I'm committed to hiring. I am committed, not just to interns, I'm committed to hiring everybody who graduates in this area. Get the companies that employ, BLM companies employ over 400,000, right?
460,000.
460,000. Get them to say, we're going to hire everybody that graduates in this field or this field or this field. Get people excited about staying here. Do that right now. That doesn't have to wait for a change in the curriculum or a change in the structure. Speak up. Sign on the dotted line. If my children knew that they were going to have a job in a certain field, now it's AI or quantum computing, they would have gone into it and they would have said, that's where I'm going to work. It used to be, when I was growing up, people knew they were going to work at Ford, GM, or Chrysler. And they knew what engineering degree they had to get. And they went right into that job. And they stayed there for 30 or 35 years. There's no contract like that anymore.
Well, but isn't it harder to make the case to a lot of people that a college education is worth it? You're taking on a mortgage, basically, to afford a 4-year degree these days. That's if you're lucky enough to get out in 4 years. And then we see so many people with whatever their degree is, underemployed and swamped by college debt for a long time. So make the case to me that that's what I need to do if I'm a high schooler.
I think Jeff said this, there's several paths. College isn't absolutely required for every job in the state of Michigan or across this country. But if we can prove through statistics, BLM has them all, that certain college degrees give you certain opportunities that you would not have without one. And so again, making sure people understand if you're going to go this route, this is how far you're going to get, this is how much you're going to make. If you go the college degree route in the fields that are needed, this could be your career path, this is your income opportunity. And so it's telling the kids the truth and giving them options. But I think college degrees are really important for certain fields. For others, it's not.
I was going to say, the data is absolutely right, Sandy. I mean, if you look at the highest correlation rate between income, it's education. Do you have a post-secondary credential? Michigan used to be an outlier, right? We used to have higher incomes than we did education, and we were out of step statistically.
Right.
We've gone right back to where the lines say we should be, which is unfortunately a lower income state.
I mean, at the end of the day, we've got to find a way quickly to get younger and smarter. That is the winning strategy across the country, around the world, younger and smarter. And that has to be paramount in all the education conversations. It has to be paramount when we talk about growing jobs. We have to find those companies that are creating the jobs that are going to retain the talent here. And I would just say, and we have to get angry about this, frankly. We have to go compete for this. I grew up in Michigan, moved out west, came back 5 years ago, and I was in Denver. I have 4 kids total, 2 that were off to college when we were in Denver. Not once did either of them get recruited by an out-of-state school. We moved here, my last 2 are now getting ready to go to college, and inundated with Texas Christian, Baylor, South Florida, Central Florida, Alabama, inundated, and they all have strategies around out-of-state tuition is bought down to in-state tuition rates. So it's the same price to go to Florida as it is to go to Michigan, as it is to go to Michigan State. They're putting scholarships out there to bring the price down. And it just struck me, at the start of my economic development career 25, 30 years ago, the southern states came after and stole our companies. Flat out stole our companies. They had an aggressive strategy to build their economies. They wanted the auto industry, and they went out and got it. Now they're coming after our children. They're trying to steal our children. We have to get angry at this and go fight. And our colleges, universities got to do a better job of making the case as to why they should stay here. And employers, to your point, Sandy, need to be signing up to keep them, give them the co-ops, give them the internships, because the demographic drought is real. The labor force drought is going to be real. We've got to have employers that have the interesting work for them to do. We have it. We've done it before. We just have to get angry about it and go compete.
Economic development has become more human. People want to live, I know people's children who have left the state of Michigan without a job to go somewhere they wanted to live, and then they'll find a job. And so if you think about what we've got in this state, we have 30% of the Great Lakes surface. We have 19 million acres of trees. Anybody that disses Michigan hasn't been to the west side of the state or the northern. I'm not kidding. And it's just, we have so much to offer in terms of resources. We've just got to show it, be committed to it. One of the things that Dan Gilbert does whenever he recruits somebody from out of state is he said, I won't have an interview with you until you come and spend 2 days in Detroit. We won't even consider you.
But Sandy, I think we have to recognize, though, we are a big state. We have a lot of infrastructure. We have a lot of assets, but we're acting like a big, stodgy state. We're not leveraging our assets. We're not leveraging our strengths.
I agree.
And we're behaving like Blockbuster when the world is more Netflix and TikTok. And we have all the resources. We should be able to pivot. We should be able to make that move. I think it's a function of leadership.
To demand it. We have to demand it.
Yeah.
Of Bill Schuette and your
That's
colleagues.
all.
No, you're exactly right, and I think that goes back to making sure, respectfully, I'm not sure we need a growth officer. We need growth policies. We need to make sure, because the easiest way to win is to do more winning, right? And that creates, the momentum, and then people are saying, I want to move to Detroit because that's where the young people are. I want to go to Grand Rapids because that's where my friends are going after graduation, and I'll figure it out, right? And then you have companies who are able to attract and develop the type of talent, and Devin, on your point on education, not everybody needs a college education. Everyone should have, feel they're empowered to have that opportunity. But everybody needs to read, right? Everybody needs, in every career field, to have those types of abilities. If we're not focusing and delivering on those core objectives, we're not gonna win.
I'll quickly mention education is the subject of tomorrow's WTF session. So I want to make sure that we get back to something you touched on a second ago, Jeff, which is how difficult it is to do business in Michigan sometimes. The second pillar from Business Leaders for Michigan is making it easier. I mentioned the 77 steps to open a restaurant. You just mentioned 50% of the work just doesn't ever make the deadline. What do we do to knock down all of these obstacles to become a more business-friendly place, not just in reality, but definitely in reputation?
Well, leaders are taking this on around the country. I think you see this movement, whether it's Abundance, the book that Ezra Klein wrote with Derek Thompson, whether it's Breakneck, which is another book about the difference between a lawyerly state that is the United States versus China. You look at the differences in how they can build things. Somebody was talking about looking out over the Mackinac Bridge and saying, can you imagine trying to build that today? What kind of obstacles we would have in the way of that? Could we even get it done? How much it would cost? This is kind of the state we find ourselves in, is there are good regulations in place for...
We do have a nice new bridge that's popped up on the Detroit River.
We do. Is it open yet?
It's not open yet, no.
Yeah.
Well, we got to come.
And we had to have Canada pay for it, if you remember.
Fair. Yes.
So, but in the U.S., like this has been a challenge. So, in Michigan, we can say, for new home construction, and we have one of, the biggest challenges in the country about supply side in home construction.
Yeah.
It's actually erasing some of our competitive advantage on having affordable housing here in Michigan. Nationally, it's $98,000 or $93,000 on a new home is all because of regulation and the different requirements we put on it. Now, we make it really hard to build. We make it, I think in the city of Detroit, the majority of lots, right, that had homes actually torn down on them couldn't be rebuilt in single-family homes because of zoning requirements, regulations. The new mayor is trying to take that on. She's doing same-day permitting. She's doing pre-approved housing permits. All those things are good, but we have to have a cultural change in this state. When when you have all of these delays at the state level on permitting, which doesn't affect health or safety or environment, but just as simply there because there's a culture that says, we're not here to get you to yes. We're not here to try to solve a problem and help you and help you get to serve that customer or build that building. We're here to put you through a process. That starts with leadership. And you see states like Pennsylvania who've taken it on, and they put in place a guarantee. If you apply for a permit in Pennsylvania and they miss their own deadline, they refund your dollars that you paid for that permit and fee. You know how many times?
Bill in Michigan. Yeah.
That's right. You have that bill.
Yeah.
But you know how many times Pennsylvania has had to exercise that? Less than half a dozen.
Yeah.
Because it was a cultural change. Those are the types of things we can put in place here. And it's not just in permitting, it's all levels of government. So how do we get out of our own way?
Bill, getting rid of red tape is a double-edged thing, because I think some other people think that, no, then we're getting rid of protections, that due diligence sometimes.
No, I mean, we obviously need to have common sense protections and regulations, and those are good things. But if you're a child care center in the state of Michigan, you don't need to report to 6 different state agencies. How about we just do one? If you're trying to build a home in the state of Michigan, maybe instead of having 3 different departments that you have to coordinate which type of sprinkler you need, you go to one, and we have a one-stop shop for our permits and for our processes there, because the average age for a new home buyer is 40 in our state. First-time home buyer in Michigan is 40, and when we're adding $100,000 in costs just from the regulations that are imposed by the government, we're pricing people out. So we need to get hungry about it. We need to make sure we're shifting that culture and getting a government that's culture is customer service oriented, because none of the business leaders of Michigan would be in business if they operated like the state of Michigan did.
Yeah.
And
You
we're
know,
going
purple
around the,
used to be my favorite color, and it's not anymore. and what you're saying, Bill, I agree with you.
Yeah.
There are states that have done it.
Yep.
Whatever you're talking about, all of you, all of us, states have taken on those challenges and fixed them. So what the fix is, we've got to make a structural change. We cannot continue to operate where every couple of years we're changing direction.
But we've done it before. We can do it again. I mean, we've had successful runs as a state not too long ago, right? The 90s were a very strong decade. We had alignment. We had some things happen. I'd go back. We're a resource-rich, we are an asset-rich state. We're not a small state. We're not a tiny state. We're not scrapping for resources. We have it. We just have to have the leadership to pick the direction we want to go. I always was taught, don't listen to what, forgive me, Bill, don't listen to what a politician says. Watch what they do with their budget. Watch what they do with the budget. Let's put it towards things that are going to produce an ROI. We've heard a lot of conversation today about education, infrastructure. There is an ROI in economic development and job creation and job growth that has to be fostered here and sort of refresh our industries.
Jeff, you wanted to jump in there with something?
I was just going to say, I mean, I think there are stories from around the state, and it helps humanize this, but when we hear from business leaders, and we hear from developers, and we hear from people who are trying to invest in the state, they continuously talk about how difficult it is in Michigan versus other states, right? Public sector consultants who's doing this work to actually interview people have found multiple quotes of, it's easier to do business in the Middle East than it is to do business in Michigan. It's easier to do business in San Francisco than it is to do business in Michigan. Those should scare the hell out of us.
Yeah, yeah.
25 years of decline should scare the hell out of us.
That's right.
The other thing, Randy, I wanted to touch, if there is, and we're just about out of time, but it seems to me, as a father of 4, and my kids live in Los Angeles, Chicago, and Washington, D.C., insanely expensive housing markets. It would seem to me that we've just talked about housing is an opportunity here to find a way to really create something for young people to see where maybe where they are right now, they don't see the way toward the picket fence and the fireplace.
I think that's an absolute competitive advantage that we have to take advantage of. And that means unleashing more housing supply, unleashing some of the regulations around housing zoning and regulations so we can get more supply built. But in Denver, I come back from a lunch, and there's this young woman working with me, Brooke, and I see her screen. She's clearly not working. She's looking at Zillow, and she's looking at a house for $700,000. I'm like, Brooke, what are you doing? I know what you make. I have a pretty good idea what your husband makes. There's no way you could afford a $700,000 house, but her parents have PhDs. Parents have dough, and that was allowed them to buy a house, and that's the only way Brooke and her husband were able to buy a house. So that's not the case here. It's gone up, the pricing has gone up, but it's still relatively to the hottest markets in the country. We're a relative bargain. We have to show a pathway for young people to have home ownership. They're ready, they want it. If we can deliver that with a quality job, they will stay. We have to get after it.
Anybody else want to jump on that, on the housing?
I just think too, property taxes come into play for that majorly, because again, if we have housing stock, we have a population that is aging, and you're a senior citizen, you want to move to a smaller home to open up some of the housing stock, or a fixer-upper for a younger family to move into, you get hit with a tax that then makes it financially impossible for you to downsize.
Yep.
And so we need to structure our system so they're incentivizing innovation and growth.
Yep. Last thing for each of you. You're each given the magic wand. You can do one thing to change the economic climate in Michigan. Randy, what's your one tap with the wand?
I'd be playing the drums. There's a number of them. One thing we haven't covered, Devin, is innovation and investing in what's next. And we had it going for a while with the Life Science Corridor way back when, and had a lot of great upshoots, some things that are now paying dividends 15 years later. We need to get back into that mode of investing into what's next, not only incentivizing what has been, but incentivizing what's next so that we can find some of those jobs that are going to be more appealing, more interesting to young people.
Glad you just teed that up. The next WTF session, by the way, at 4 o'clock is on AI and data centers. Bill, you've got the wand now.
Well, I don't even need a magic wand. I just need the House bill I'm the sponsor of that refunds permit fees that are delayed. I think that would be a massive culture shift. It's obviously not the one-size-fits-all, but of something practical. I'm in the business of getting solutions done. I think that would be the start of a culture shift of how we do business in the state.
Like it. Sandy?
Michigan has been known throughout history for its innovation. And we're the first state that put the world on wheels. And what did we do in World War II? What did we help with? We are known for our history of innovation. That's our legacy. Let's use it now to create the future for this state.
Yeah. Jeff?
A commitment by every leader here to make purple an asset and not a liability.
Oh, that'd be great. Jeff Donofrio, Sandy Pierce, Representative Bill Schuette, Randy Thelen. How about a round of applause for our panel? And thank you all very much for being here. Thanks.
Bill?
Yes.
I'm glad you got that.
Oh, well, thank you.